all of this happening right before Election Day. Colonel, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well.
So when I say, we're on the precipice of World War III,
we have to consider the following points. If you look at the current state of affairs on the ground in the Middle East.
Hello, friends. Today we have another nuclear issue under review. Colonel McGregor told what is happening behind the closed doors of the White House and explained what is happening in the world from his professional point of view. McGregor also told us what to expect next. The release promises to be interesting and exciting. Sit down, friends, we are starting. I will briefly introduce this hero to you. Colonel Douglas McGregor is a man who always says what he thinks and does it in a way that is both scary and fascinating to listen to. A former U.S. Army officer, a veteran of the Persian Gulf War, the architect of the famous tank battle of the 73rd East, a strategist and a sharp critic of American foreign policy. His bold statements are like a cold shower for politicians and generals accustomed to cozy misconceptions. McGregor is not afraid to call a spade, whether it's failures in wars, overestimation of American power, or the illusion of invincibility. He's never boring. Sometimes he exposes myths about the superpower, then sarcastically assesses Washington's modern policy.
War III, are we being hyperbolic here, or are we already there? And what do you think that this means ahead of the election?
Well, we're not there, but I don't think you're being hyperbolic.
A real bonfire of truth in the world of smokescreens. The presenter begins the issue with these words. Yesterday, Donald Trump made an address where he declared his readiness to immediately end the war between Russia and Ukraine, focusing all his political will on this. However, Joe Biden's administration seems to have ignored his statement, ordering a long-range missile strike on Russian territory. This looks like not just a show of force, but perhaps an attempt to aggravate the situation, despite all the calls for peace. Biden seems intent on bringing the world to a boiling point while still holding the presidency. All this raises serious concerns for the future of the United States, Europe, and even the Middle East. Colonel Douglas McGregor, you recently wrote an article on this topic. I have noticed that such tactics are radically different from the actions of previous presidents. For example, Lyndon Johnson, when leaving, tried not to put a stick in Richard Nixon's wheels. McGregor begins his speech, quote, "Today, we are witnessing an almost complete disregard for the interests of stability." McGregor compared the current situation to the period when President Buchanan left his successor Lincoln a divided country. But even then, there were no such obvious lies and manipulations. What is also alarming is the increased likelihood of the use of nuclear weapons, he said. Forecasters note that this risk has increased in 2024, especially after the recent strike on Russian territory. Vladimir Putin, in turn, changed the doctrine of the use of nuclear weapons, saying that any serious attack on Russian territory could be met with a retaliatory nuclear strike. The recent launches of 6 missiles, 5 of which were intercepted, and the 6th caused only a small fire, have not yet led to serious consequences. However, provocations continue, and this increases the likelihood of further escalation. Russia has made it clear that its goal is to end the conflict, but, according to McGregor, such attacks only bring the use of radical measures closer, which can finally destroy the square. The country's energy system is already on the verge of destruction, and the upcoming winter will only worsen the disaster. Against this background, Russia has stopped gas supplies to Europe, including Austria, which exacerbates the energy crisis. All this leads to further destabilization, which is dangerous for the whole world. The process of Russia's advance in eastern Ukraine continues with staggering speed, and many experts monitoring the situation warn that the situation may spiral out of control. The Russian General Staff is probably considering the option of advancing to the Dnieper as a key strategic goal. If the conflict escalates into a nuclear war, a campaign against Kyiv is being discussed as one of the possible scenarios. These topics are being actively discussed in Russian military circles, and although they remain hypothetical, the implementation of this plan is becoming more likely. Meanwhile, Washington continues to act with the intention of maximizing the damage to Trump by channeling new billions of dollars in arms supplies. This, according to many, can lead to the death of both Europeans and Americans, which does not stop American politicians in any way. The threat of further escalation, especially involving nuclear weapons, is becoming increasingly apparent. Tensions in eastern Ukraine and in Eastern Europe as a whole continue to rise, and any attempts to exaggerate North Korea's role in this conflict only add false reasons to justify escalation. In reality, experts say, there is no evidence of the presence of North Korean troops. All this is just used to justify tactical strikes and increase the scale of the conflict. If the strike systems that NATO is sending to Ukraine end up on the territory of Germany, France, or the United Kingdom, the consequences could be catastrophic. In this case, Russia, according to its leadership, will be forced to respond, and these countries may become direct participants in the conflict with Russia. Such a move will lead to a large-scale escalation, and, as experts warn, the NATO air defense system simply will not be able to cope with the thousands of missiles that Russia is capable of launching. This may be the moment when the war will go beyond and directly affect NATO countries, which will exacerbate the global crisis and lead to unpredictable consequences for all sides. The end of the first part of the speech. Well, friends, have you fallen yet? The brightest part of the performance is waiting for us. We are listening. I do not think that this will happen, because Putin clearly does not seek such a development. He understands perfectly well that Trump intends to end the war, so he will use deterrence measures. Nevertheless, in the current conditions, the highest price is paid by the residents of the country of Wu, who can actually be destroyed. At the same time, Sweden and Finland urgently began to prepare their citizens for war, stating that the situation was extremely serious. The journalist takes the floor and asks, "You recently mentioned in your article Trump and the storm of the century about the Middle East. But, as you can see, what is happening in Ukraine has long ceased to be a local crisis. This has serious consequences for other regions, including the Middle East. For example, in Washington, Russia is perceived as an eternal and unchangeable enemy, excluding any attempts at negotiations or peaceful coexistence. However, Russia has key interests in the Middle East, and it will continue to support Iran. What do you think of this, Douglas?" McGregor takes the floor, quote, "Putin has stated bluntly that protecting Iran is one of Russia's priorities. Moreover, he made it clear to Israel that he would not tolerate attacks on the positions of Russian troops in Syria. At the same time, the Russian leadership is actively working in the region, demonstrating its influence, especially in Iran. Moreover, Russia is strengthening its position in other parts of the Middle East. Against this background, a regional alliance is being formed, uniting countries opposed to the United States, including Turkey, which has severed diplomatic relations with Israel, has clearly indicated its intentions to deal with this. Despite the fact that the United States is trying to use the Kurds to put pressure on Turkey, it seems pointless. Turkish forces can eliminate positions in northern Iraq within a few weeks. At the same time, Turkey is already facing a huge number of refugees on its territory, and millions more may arrive from Lebanon. The situation is tense to the limit. Egypt and Turkey are ready to act together. Jordan, where there are millions of Palestinian Arabs, is on the verge of an explosion. The region has become a powder keg, and the U.S. actions against Russia only increase tension. It is becoming obvious to Moscow that there is no point in cooperating with the West to prevent a war in the Middle East. On the contrary, Russia may seek to inflict maximum damage to the interests of the United States and its allies in the region, which is consistent with its strategy in Eastern Europe. However, it is worth admitting that the United States is hardly ready for a major regional conflict. We can't even be sure of our weapon stocks, which casts doubt on the ability to continue the current policy, end quote. Next, Colonel McGregor takes a break and lays it all out. What can we expect, friends? We are listening carefully, quote, "The French seem to have completely lost their sense of reality, since they are ready to supply Ukraine with cruise missiles. The Germans, who declared that they would not send anything else, suddenly decided to transfer controlled weapons systems to Ukraine. This behavior looks like a direct provocation, as if they themselves are begging Russia to respond harshly. Moscow is not bluffing, and Russians are not prone to empty threats. Washington still does not seem to have realized this, and the reasons for such short-sightedness cannot be explained. Meanwhile, a dangerous game is clearly being played in the United States. It seems that they are deliberately pushing the situation towards disaster in order to leave Trump a legacy of a major regional or even global conflict. Such a development could ruin his chances of returning to the presidency in the coming months. As for Trump himself, he probably realizes that war can destroy his presidency. History shows that war not only does not bring political benefits to the winners, but also often destroys their reputation. It is enough for him to recall the 20th century. Leaders associated with major wars, as a rule, resigned with a political collapse. Trump certainly does not want to repeat the fate of Lyndon Johnson or Woodrow Wilson, whose reputation was destroyed by the wars of their era. But there is a contradiction here. Despite this understanding, he remains committed to unconditional support for Israel. This is one of the key characteristics of his policy, which he is unlikely to abandon. However, he may not realize that the current tensions with Russia and events in Eastern Europe will inevitably affect the Middle East. The impact of this situation will become global, and the consequences can be catastrophic. Putin has repeatedly tried to convey to the West the following: Russia is capable of horizontal escalation. Moscow can create serious problems for the United States in Africa, the Middle East and Asia, destroying their positions in these regions. Why, contrary to common sense, does Washington provoke such scenarios? Why have Russian troops and bases become more active at strategically important points? Why do their submarines appear in the Atlantic, Pacific, Mediterranean, and Red Seas? The answer is obvious. Russia is ready for confrontation, even if it means a direct conflict with the United States. Putin does not seek this, but Russia is demonstrating its readiness for a serious fight if forced. There is an important question. Are we ready for this? I can say that neither our fleet nor our aviation are properly prepared. And it doesn't matter, because if you're not ready, then why provoke a conflict? This is extremely dangerous. Starting a fight without confidence in victory is absurd. People now live in a world of illusions, and this is further compounded by the fact that Washington seems to be on Epstein's island, surrounded by an island of fantasies. They live in a reality where they consider themselves the masters of the universe and are confident that they can do anything. But it has already ended, and it has been more than 20 years since it became obvious. And in response to this, there is a message from the BRICS: Russia, China, India, and Brazil. They send a clear message: behave like a normal nation, return to the normal relations that existed before. At one time, you sought to do business with everyone. You did not want military conflicts. We need to switch from the concept of bombing to doing business. Once upon a time, it would have been a success, and the economy would have recovered. But now the choice has been made in favor of confrontation. President Trump and Biden may take different positions on many issues, but both are united on Israel. However, Israel is not just defending itself, it is initiating a large-scale offensive conflict throughout the region, believing that America will solve its problems. Personally, I think this is a strategic disaster for both the United States and other countries, and, of course, for Israel itself. Based on this, it will not lead to anything good. And now I want to voice my thoughts, friends. Honestly, after such materials, you start to think that we all live on a powder keg. But at the same time, someone upstairs is persistently trying to light the fuse. Listening to McGregor, you catch yourself thinking, how absurd is humanity when, instead of trading and developing technology, it is still measuring missiles and fighting for territory? Moreover, it is so absurd that it cannot even admit that it has not had a monopoly on force for a long time. McGregor is right. Who in their right mind would start a fight knowing that they could hit back? But apparently, common sense is not about this story. The second thing that catches on in this material is the feeling of some kind of theatrical inadequacy of what is happening. Just think about it. Countries that have been playing global police for years are now provoking conflicts themselves, without really preparing for them. Well, like in a bad play where the hero rushes at the dragon with a broken sword, because it's important for the plot. Thank you, Douglas, for describing it in simple words, but with such icy sarcasm that you want to laugh and grab your head at the same time. And finally, McGregor is not only a sharp analyst, but also a man who is not afraid to tell the unpleasant truth. His words are like the sound of an alarm clock for those who have played into their fantasies of world hegemony. He shows that everything is not as simple as we would like to believe. Although, personally, his frankness sometimes makes me nervous. Forgive my tone. This is not an attack, but rather a manifestation of the very feeling when you realize that everything is too serious to laugh and too absurd to cry. Thank you, Colonel, you're a great guy. We would like to have more of them who speak as they are and not as they want to hear. And you write your opinion, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel. There is a lot of interesting things ahead. I want to express my gratitude to my viewers. Thank you for your attention. Be healthy. See you.